In 1959, as I walked up Elmbank Street in Glasgow towards the Glasgow School of Art to enrol in it, I joined the SNP, which was in Elmbank Street at that point. I never for one moment thought I would be standing here at an audience who were not wondering whether Scotland could be independent, but were wondering when Scotland was going to be independent. And this fact that we're sitting here watching a film about our two small northern neighbours with the lessons they can give us is a great night, and we've got a great person here to talk about it, so I'm going to hand you over now to Lesley Riddoch.
This is an amazing thing actually, because Al from Phantom Power and I have made these films, and actually this is the first time there's an actual cinema has shown it, so it's kind of like almost verging on normal, you know, which is sort of an unusual thing when you're used to working in the kind of like margins actually of the media these days. But yes, I mean, where we're at in many respects, of course, there is still a huge argument about when, how there'll be a referendum, what will happen with Brexit and all that kind of thing. But there is a sort of feeling of some kind of inevitable shift. And actually, very rightly, people's minds are starting to turn, not to sort of how we get an independence referendum, but what we do with this country when we're independent. Because actually, what is this all for if it is simply to change the guard? You know, I mean, that's not a bad thing to do, but it's not enough. And thankfully, we are sort of flanked by small, successful nations who are friendly, who speak English, who have broadly the same sense of humour, who, okay, if you go to visit them, you need to take everything with you because it costs an arm and a leg, I'll grant you that. But who've been through every situation we're thinking about, they have experienced. There's nothing that we're facing that they have not thought through. Just as a little indicator, the Nordic nations set up a Nordic travel area 40 years before Schengen. 40 years. Because it was so obvious to them that they needed to be able to travel freely around their world. So, you know, they have all sorts of different relationships with Europe. There's the crazy one you're about to see first in the Faroes, where they are out of the EU while the mothership Denmark is in. And that was achieved with nobody dying, which is extraordinary. So, you know, there's a lot for us, not sort of almost just to learn, but to realise that in what is to follow, where we do need some guidance and at least some people who are not freaked out by the prospect of being or aspiring to be a small, powerful nation of 5 million people, by the way, who don't think 5 million is small. From the point of view of the Faroes, population 55,000, we are a giant. And we would be a relatively big player with our population, so that once you enter a different parallel, a different context in which Scotland sits, and it does, we're not just the frozen north of Britain, we are the fertile south of Scandinavia, and we sit in a glorious arc between the Celts of Ireland right through to the Nordic nations, which some of us have genetic links with yet. So, you know, this is realizing ourselves, because we are that mongrel nation with all those different dimensions. And this is an attempt simply to tell you stories about your neighbours, who will be, I think, far more involved in our story from now on than they have been to date. So this is number one, the Faroes, and I hope you enjoy it. We'll have a wee break after it, because there'll likely be things that you want to ask or whatever about the Faroes, and you might not remember it by the time you've also had Iceland on top of it all. So we'll have a little break in the middle and any questions, and then hammer on with Iceland, have a few questions, and then we'll all go home speaking Icelandic. So I hope you enjoy it. Come with me as I explore Scotland's powerful and inspiring wee European neighbours. How are they able to do things differently? And what vision do they offer of a brighter future for Scotland? the Faroe Islands, 200 miles north of Scotland, with a population just 1% of ours on a cluster of 18 islands. But it's connected in all kinds of ways through language, technology, politics and infrastructure. Tunnels. This comes up on you very suddenly on the Faroes when you're driving, and it's a little unnerving, but it's the reason that these 18 islands are actually one nation. There's about 20 tunnels I can count. There's 2 sub-sea tunnels. One of them's about 5 or 6 kilometres long. It provides equality, because if you can all access the high-paid jobs in Tórshavn, then it means that the wealth is spread equally around all the islands. And that's one of the main reasons that they actually embarked on this, is fairness. So fairness and a connected nation.
Hej, kan jag få den?
One of the first things that strikes you when you come to the Faroes is what you hear. It's not English, but it's not Danish. It's Faroese, spoken by just 66,000 people across the world. It's about the same size as Gaelic, far smaller than Scots. But when Google ignored their language, they prompted a feisty Faroese response. Faroese Translate.
Kvítanaugur means sheep testicles in Faroese. The problem is that Google Translate does not work with Faroese.
One of the people behind the Faroese Translate campaign is Tor Verland Johansen, Chief Executive of Sansir Communications.
It's a fact that every 14 days a language dies or goes silent in the world. It's very special that a small country like the Faroe Islands have their own language. It is what makes us Faroese. We are so small that the big companies like, for example, Google, they almost neglect us. Because Google have this translation service they call Google Translate, but it doesn't feature Faroese. So instead of just saying, oh, we want it, we said, well, we'll make it ourselves.
We will help them with Faroe Islands Translate, powered by Faroese volunteers.
And this time we'll make it with live people, real people, Faroese people translating from every language in the whole world, and press translate, and seconds later they got a live translations on Faroese.
Or simply learn how to say, we are ready to translate for you at Faroe Islands.
We are now working together to officially add Faroese to Google Translate. We went up against Google once again. We didn't have Street View here on the Faroe Islands. So we made up this story about this young woman. She put camera on sheeps with solar panels so they could run for several hours. And then the sheep walked around and they filmed these wonderful islands.
It works pretty good and the sheep doesn't really notice it.
And this story went viral. So suddenly they had this young girl asking Google to come and help her making Street View on the Faroe Islands. And so they did.
Look, Google is coming.
So now we are all covered with Google Street View. So it was a fantastic campaign for both the Faroe Islands and for everybody, actually also for Google. We are using technology like Skype, FaceTime, whatever, so it feels like that we are here. Technology, we really use it as a people to always be connected.
The reason people in the back of beyond could make videos in seconds is the Faroes broadband.
You're one of the smallest countries and you've actually got a massive achievement when it comes to broadband. What is that?
We like to think that we have the world's fastest mobile broadband, and there's no other operator that can deliver the speeds that we can. We have mobile broadband coverage all over the islands, even the sea, up to 80 miles from the shore.
How did this happen? How were you set up?
We are government-owned, even though we are in competition. So it's the support from the government that we are allowed to use all this investment, or do all these investments to get this full network. We have this very good partnership agreement with Huawei also, who is our hardware supplier. And we have always tried to give the same experience, the same services to all population, even on the furthest island. The prices are the same and the services are the same everywhere on the islands. Our next step is 5G, obviously. 5G is almost equal to Internet of Things. You can set a device up on a mountaintop or wherever you are in a tunnel, and you don't have to do maintenance on it for maybe 10 or 15 years because the battery time is very low. So those are the technologies that we are implementing at the moment.
Did you not doubt yourselves?
No, not at all. I mean, you have to try at least. You can't just sit back, and we want to connect everyone.
So the Faroes has the world's fastest mobile broadband, does it? With the help of the Faroese lifeboat, we're heading out into the fjords to find out if that's really true. Well, we've left the capital, Tórshavn, now. The lads are stepping on the power and we're heading out into the open sea. Well, there's a mountain between us and Tórshavn now. We're an island out. It's quite bumpy, but Magni, who is the captain here, has got FaceTime to his daughter in Copenhagen because we have 100 megabits where we're sitting right now.
This is my daughter, she's pregnant, so on the 16th of June I'll be a grandfather again.
Hello, Scotland.
Other aspects of their media are pretty remarkable too. Well, that was a kind of bumpy ride. Back in the hotel now, just trying to chill a wee bit and discovering what's available. And there are 3 newspapers produced here in the Faroes. There are 6 radio stations, including 1 public radio station, and even 1 TV channel that includes international reporting dedicated to the Faroes. That's pretty impressive for 50,000 people. The common factor in all these success stories is the Faroese Parliament. The Faroes is a Danish territory, but has had home rule for 70 years. I'm here in the Lagting, which is the Parliament in the Faroes. It's a dinky but lovely traditional old building, and it's got 33 MPs plus a set of ministers. More importantly, it has got a wheen of powers. I'd say this is the world's most powerfully devolved parliament, and I've come to speak to the Republican MP, Björn Samuelson, about just what clout it wields. Björn, the powers that this Faroese Parliament has are really quite extraordinary. Can you list what you're able to control here?
Well, we are almost in charge of everything. We are in charge fully of taxing, of healthcare, of education, every thinkable thing. So there are some small things that are still under Danish power, but actually we are a very self-governing country. So this parliament has a very huge role in making laws every day, and of course thinking of the well-being of the people in Faroe Islands.
You didn't actually even mention energy and broadband, but you control them too.
Yes, and of course we are quite proud of that, and we are trying to cooperate with other countries and areas where they can use our expertise. And we have made a goal that we in 2030 will be 100% on renewable energy ashore. And that's one of our biggest issues for the coming years.
But let's talk money. You are given some money from the Copenhagen government. Do they effectively subsidise these islands?
I would say clearly no. The amount we get from Denmark every year is it's lesser than a decent football player is bought for today. You see, Faroe Islands might be tiny when it comes to population, but we are actually one of those large ocean nations. We're a very big country if you take our sea territory. And we're a very rich country if you take our resources. So we don't need the money from Denmark, is my point of view, and hopefully we will very soon get economical independence.
But the deal seems to be that when you take on more responsibility and power from Copenhagen, obviously you have to finance that yourselves. Is that the way it works?
Yes, that's the way it works, and that's what we want. We want to say that when we are paying for ourselves, of course we are also deciding for ourselves. And that's why it has been so important to take responsibility for every thinkable area. If you want to decide, you have to pay.
So the way devolution works here is that if you want to take a power to the Faroes, you basically have to pay for it.
I could put it another way. If you take healthcare, for example, we decide how much to tax in this country, so we also decide how to use the money. We use a lot of money to buy services from the Danes, or we send patients to Iceland, for example. But we have the freedom to decide from whom we buy those services. And I think that's very important for us to have those possibilities to decide on our own.
Now, the other huge thing is that you have the right to sign international treaties, and that's the reason that you are out of the EU whilst Denmark is in. Now, how on earth does that work?
Actually, when Denmark went into EU, Faroe Islands decided not to follow. And we can design international treaties, for example, on fishery issues. That's a very long historical tradition that we do that. So we have always done that. The Faroese people are running the Faroe Islands. But because we are still a part of another nation, we don't fix into any box. And that's make it often possible. I mean, we try to get member of EFTA, and we try to get member of the Nordic Council, and we try to get member of WTO. And they say, yes, but what kind of country are you, actually? So that's why we are saying we are already so self-governing. Why shouldn't we take the final step?
And the reason that you have that incredible power to be able to decide big things, like whether you join the EU and fishing treaties, is because of a vote way back in 1946. Can you tell us about that?
In 1946, the people of the Faroe Island voted for independence. There was a majority of the people who said yes to independence, and this was, of course, connected to the Second World War, where we had been totally cut the connection with Denmark because we were occupied by the British, and the Danes were occupied by the Germans. So we did very well on our own. So the people said, okay, we will do just like Iceland. We will go out of the coalition with Denmark, and we will be a sovereign state. But it didn't go that way. So we got this Home Rule law instead in 1948. And this Home Rule law gave us a lot of competence compared to what we had before 1948.
It will still strike people as quite extraordinary that 50,000 people think they can be alone in the world on their own, not even in the EU. Do you get a sense of that from everyone else, how astonished they are at your almost bravery?
I think that some people maybe think that we are a bit naive, but I think quite the opposite. It's because we are thinking about the whole world is connected today. There's no such country as being one alone country. We just want the right to decide for ourselves with whom we make agreements. And so we say, when we are a sovereign country, we have the same possibilities as other countries, and we don't fall between two chairs as we often do today. So I think it's quite logical, actually, if you know the story of this country. I don't think anyone in Faroe Islands, or even in Denmark, think that Denmark and Faroe Islands is the same country. I mean, we never were, so to me it's quite natural and logical.
Of course, some folk are more cautious about the future and think younger generations forget the Faroese economy is essentially dependent on just one thing.
We have fish, 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 and fish. You have a polar bear.
You didn't kill this yourself, did you?
No. That is very, very, very important to have fish, to eat fish. For 40 years ago, I think it was 20-30 fillet factory on the island here. Now we have 3 or 4, 10,000 fishermen. Now we have 1,500. We are using the machine to produce the fish. They are going out of the country to produce in Denmark and Germany. We are not producing that in the Faroes. If we have problem with a bad year of mackerel, salmon, it has been the biggest problem in the Faroes, so we can think about. Because we have not anything to fill it up with. We have to go back to the old days where we are a fishing nation and we have to live of the fish who are growing up around the island here. The new fishing people are not thinking the same as because I am too old-fashioned.
Island life is traditional and includes the controversial practice of whaling. It's socially conservative too, until now. I spoke to some young students to find out what's changed.
Actually, most of the young people, when they decide to study, most of them go to Copenhagen to study, and it kind of becomes like, then it's actually a bit more exotic to stay here, it seems, in a way. So
I love the Faroe Islands, so this is like my home. So when I leave, I feel like I always belong here.
It isn't hard to get into a place in the Faroe Islands where you have a voice and you can make a change. The question is, should I try to stay and make a change, or should I just take the easy way out and leave?
Being close to their parliament has helped these young women feel able to influence the shape of the future, and that's helped reverse population decline, in stark contrast to islands round Scotland.
Moving back to Faroe Islands is a bit hot or in at the moment. It's primarily because we have a good economy at the moment, but it also, I think, because we have made some mind changes during the last years. We have, for example, put in place legislation on same-sex marriage, and we have also put emphasis on education and other issues that is important.
Yeah. That's why the bill made such a huge difference, because it opened us towards ourselves too, and accepting ourselves.
Now we're also talking about like the abortion law. We don't have free abortion in the Faroe Islands, and we keep fighting to have the society that we want. I think also I feel as a woman, I feel like it's also my duty in a way to fight for to making Faroe Islands a country where I want to live in and where my friends want to live, and also the people who study abroad. Like, we want to make this a society where we want to stay, and I guess also being small gives you good opportunity to do these things, because
you get your voice heard when you're just 50,000 people.
And that's one of the best thing about studying in the Faroe Islands and living here as a young person, is that we can make the society better and make people want to be here.
Erica Hayfield is a Scot who's married and made her life in the Faroes, and she has an interesting insight into how things have changed.
A few years ago, we kind of hit rock bottom because we were seeing depopulation for a number of years. And I think that we had a huge public debate which really made us question, indeed, what are we doing on these rocks in the middle of the North Atlantic? The government started certain initiatives, and one thing was investment in our university, cultural investment, presenting young people, young Faroese who are abroad, with the opportunities that we have. And it seemed to be very much a collective effort in the Faroe Islands. We were determined that we were going to change things round. Over the past 3 years, 21% on average, of the population growth stems actually from immigration from outside the Nordic countries. So that's contributing as well, and that's actually making the Faroes more diverse. From having been unpopular or uncool or a place with no opportunities, it seems to be a hip and trendy place. Small places like the Faroe Islands, where people are highly interconnected, highly interdependent, and very intimate society, means it's very unhierarchical. And that's a good thing in many cases, sometimes not such a good thing. But it does mean that change comes quicker compared to a large, more bureaucratic society.
New trade routes have also made the Faroes the hub of the Arctic, a confident international player able to host the massive Arctic Circle Conference.
The vision was to create an international platform of dialogue and cooperation, which was in principle an open democratic forum where anybody could participate, whether you were representing governments of major powers, or you were ministers, or you were a global business leader or a major scientist, or whether you were a young student or an activist or an environmentalist, where we had a democratic platform which was international in nature, but in principle open, because most of the big international conferences are closed entities.
The sea passages, it's changing quite rapidly. So in this case, in the Faroe Islands, we have a huge possibility. We're strategically placed in the Arctic Circle, and we want to be a part of it, and we want to contribute in a positive way.
And this nation of just 50,000 people also has its very own airline, and it's government-owned.
Atlantic Airways is a national carrier. It's owned by the government, but we are not subsidized. We are flying to different destinations and we are on a commercial base. And last year we had almost 300,000 passengers to and from the Faroe Islands, and we are looking forward to receive even more passengers this year, and we are also looking forward to see more tourists in the Faroe Islands. But what is good about having a national carrier and a national airline is that we always consider first the wishes of our own people. And we are seeing that people are traveling more and more. Faroese people are traveling a lot. And it's very important for our country that people are traveling in order to get new inspirations and to get a good network. And we also see that people can live in the Faroe Islands and walk abroad, and that is only possible because you have a good infrastructure. As a nation, I think it's very, very important that you have a vision. And if you think about Atlantic Airways, our vision is to connect the Faroe Islands to the world.
Also presenting at the Arctic Forum is Faroe's salmon producer Hidden Fjord, who've discovered the enduring value of quality, something Scotland may have to learn all over again if Brexit brings floods of cheap chlorinated imports.
Very many of our customers around the world are telling us they think our salmon is the best. We have times back where the salmon prices were varying very much, and we knew that the Scots were able to get better prices. But as the times run by, the government and the Faroese farmers found out that we needed to be only one farmer per fjord.
The key advance was letting the fjords recover after each generation of fish. You could call it salmon set-aside. The emphasis is quality, not quantity.
So we followed the fjord. We put in place a regulation in 2003. So after that, you were not allowed to put fish in sea if there was fish there. before.
So you must have a period where there are no fish.
Yeah, and then you go back to virginity, you can say. Many costs will increase. But the reward when you do that is that the biological motor will work much better.
Naturally enough, folk at the Arctic Forum had some views about their biggest neighbour too.
The north is definitely a territory for Scotland. Scotland is definitely a part of the north. To some extent it is right that one of your leaders said a few years ago, maybe you have been too preoccupied with looking at London and discussing your relationship with London. We and the Faroese have demonstrated how small communities in rather isolated territories can in fact enjoy a life of excellence in the 21st century economy. That the remoteness does not have to be a hindrance, whether it's in information technology or economic prosperity or many other areas. And that's important for Scotland because a big part of the Scottish population lives in those kind of conditions. And if you are mapping out an economic future for Scotland, you also have to give the people in the small communities and the remote parts of Scotland the same opportunities as if you are in the centre of Edinburgh. And here in the Faroe Islands, they have established on their own an internet telecommunication excellence that is twice the standard of Singapore, which is better than Korea. But the Faroe Islands, 50,000 people spread over these islands far out in the North Atlantic, have been able to surpass both Singapore and Korea by participating in this Arctic or Northern cooperation, whatever you call it. Scotland can be inspired by seeing there are solutions to some of the challenges that Scotland faces. And if there are some economic hindrances, then you just deal with those economic political hindrances. If you go back 15, 20 years, most people would have said communities like Iceland and the Faroe Islands would be at a disadvantage in the technological economic evolution of the 21st century. But the fact of the matter is we are now demonstrations of excellence in many of these areas. And I believe myself, and in many parts, this is within the control of the Scottish people.
The Scottish people are very strong people and they have a lot of opportunity, and I think also that I see some similarities between Scotland and the Faroe Islands. If you, for example, take renewable energy, green energy, I mean, you have a lot of possibilities there and you have a lot of competence. So I think that's one area of many where we could work much more together than we do today. And of course, also when it comes to sustainable fishery, we should talk good together because we are both living off the sea. So I think we have a lot of common interests. So I hope that we can get a closer connection to even closer connection to Scotland.
I see Scotland as to England as what we are to Denmark. Potentially, we should be independent, that's my opinion, and economically it should be a giant player in Europe in terms of all the export and all the natural resources you have. So it could be, it's a country as every other country, and why not be totally and fully independent also economically.
In the Faroe Islands we think that, for example, Scotland has much more to offer than we have. I mean, you have so fantastic whiskey, you have fantastic nature, you have fantastic people, you're famous in all over the world, you are friendly people, and so on and so on. You have so much to build on. So when we think of you, we think of, well, what's the problem?
The strength of any country is its people, obviously. Because if natural resources will fade away, people will find other solutions, so it's always the strength of the people.
The most important thing, I think, for Scottish people is to get the right to decide for themselves.
So there's a lot to think about for the future of both our nations, the mighty Faroes and our changing Scotland.
Well, we've been here for 4 days now, and what really strikes you on the Faroes is the incredible confidence of these people. They've had the confidence as a tiny island to take on the might of Google, and they won. They've had the confidence to take on the salmon industries of far, far bigger countries and seem to do better than them. They even seem to forget that they've got things like the world's fastest mobile broadband because they've had it for so long, it's just in with the bricks. You have to remind them that they've actually got such powers that it makes them virtually a self-rule parliament. So they've got all of this here, and it makes it slightly difficult to see as a Scot because it makes you realise that powers and confidence go together. And because we haven't had them, we're doubtful. I think what this also shows you is that where there's powers, there's confidence, and there's a way for a far better future.
If you'd like to see more films about our successful wee neighbours, please support our crowdfunder.
I always have a wee greet at that last bit. I don't know about you, but I get choked up every time now I see that, and I've seen it a lot of times. I just wonder if you notice that in the comments of the folk at the end of that, am I not standing in the bright area here? Dave, just you tell me where to go. There is one word you didn't hear. No. Oil. When they were listing the things that Scotland's got going for us, nobody listed oil. What the point they were making, and Ollie, made it most strongly there. He's saying, obviously the strength of any country is its people. It's, things like oil, fish even, these things will come and go. But the reason that you might want to be considering independence is because of the strength of your people. And you'll see this said even more strongly in the Iceland film. But I wonder if Scots think that the biggest card we have to play is us. Do we?
50-50, I'm sure.
Well, because actually, I think that simple thing strikes to the heart of where a lot of the wobble is in the independence proposition. Because for all sorts of reasons, Scots have not got as much confidence in their own capacity as the Nordics. It doesn't mean to say we haven't got the capacity, it means to say that we don't have the confidence that we do. And personally speaking, I've spent, some of you may know, some time thinking about this, and Blossom has got a lot of these kind of ideas in it. But we have not had the capacity to run things to the same degree as these little islands because we haven't controlled things. Not only have we not had as devolved a parliament, and you've got to hand it to the Faroese, that bolshy little moment that they had in 1946, so it was more than bolshy, they had an independence vote and the result was 50.7% yes. And that scared the living daylights out of the Danish government because they had just lost Iceland. Iceland just unilaterally went in 1944 and the Danes thought we're not making that mistake again. So unlike Britain, which doesn't really do negotiation, compromise, persuasion, the Danes realised that they had to make a good offer to the Faroese to keep them on board. And not just because of themselves, but as Björn pointed out, the vast sea area that they have, that was valuable. So they came up with this offer of this incredibly powerful parliament, and it was enough to just wrong foot the Faroese people because they were so quick and it was so powerful. I mean, that thing of offering them the chance to actually sign international treaties, You know, that's why in 1973, when the Danes decided to join the EU, the Faroese took one look at the common fisheries policy and just went, nah. Because it just nothing that controlled fisheries would ever suit them. And there was no big falling out. You know, it's not like this childish thing where there has to be one singer, one song, one size fits all. The Danes could see there was no way that the Faroese would want to be in the common fisheries policy. And actually, when Greenland acquired the same powers for their parliament as the Faroese had had since 1946, the first thing the Greenlanders did was leave the EU as well in 1985. And I think most of us were probably alive at that point, and actually you probably don't remember anyone dying over this, you know. It was quite possible to have that degree of variation. So, you know, the Faroese have had those sorts of powers and have used them for, 80, 70 years or so. That's one factor. But the other factor, there are other things I think going on too. The Faroese own their own land. They're not sitting in a situation where they have to slightly look over their shoulder and wonder if they're allowed to be where they are. They don't have to fork out an arm and a leg to build a house. They don't have to worry about whether they're entitled to be there. They have got control over their lives at a very basic level. They also have incredibly local, and I mean genuinely local government. It may not be a new observation that councils in Scotland are pretty big. They are actually the largest in the developed world by a long chalk. The average population in Scotland of a council, a local council, is 170,000 people. The average in the EU is 7,000 people. Germany, if we're taking that, for example, it's a very powerful player. Most of the reason is because it's so locally controlled in all sorts of ways. Their average council has 7,000 people. Interestingly, its size, it's 15 square kilometres. The average size of a council in Scotland is 990 square kilometres. That's the average size. If you look at our cousins in Norway, same population, they have 422 local councils. We have 32. So that, you know, a town like Dunoon would have its own council in that setup. An island like Islay would have its own council. An island like Bute would have its own council. You know, we would end up in a situation where we had far more micromanagement. And that has obvious consequences. In Norway, 1 in 88 people stands for election. In Scotland, it's 1 in 2,071. So I think we are flaring us off. We used to flare gas off oil rigs because we didn't know what the gas was for. Now we're flaring us off at local level, and actually local is where we live. There's an interesting thing happening with the Yes movement because you are organising in places. You are actually re-establishing place in a way that practically nothing else has done for a very long time. And that is beginning, you're also doing interesting things. I was in Drumchapel 2 nights ago, was it, or whatever, and that was Glasgow Northwest. So it actually had all sorts of different people, a bit like the comprehensive idea where your catchment area takes in all airts and all classes and mixes folk around. Well, actually, that's exactly what the turnout in Drumchapel was like. It was a very mixed bunch of people who were all focused on place. So that is a novel concept for us, actually, to be getting to the stage where we can start to question the size of something like Argyll and Bute as being inefficient and something we can't afford because humans matter and we have not got a human-sized council. That's pretty novel, but that whole observation, that has been the way that these countries have worked for hundreds of years. They never gave power to the centre. And if I was to ask you about the Faroes, I've told you, actually, I keep saying 50,000 population throughout that, which must annoy the hell out of them because they are 55,000 now. You know, it's like when you were 5.5, right? It really mattered. So they're 55,000 for the first time ever, Faroese. But so I've told you 170,000 is the average Scottish council size. So already the Faroese are about a third of the size of a Scottish council, right? So I wonder if you can guess how many councils they actually have. 30. It is. You've read my article. I wrote about this a while ago. They have got 30 councils. They have 55,000 people and they have 30 councils. We have 5.23 million and we have 32. And what that means is they have some councils, they would never dream, for example, of having an island that was controlled by anywhere else. Islands are just, it's non-negotiable. They are councils. Even if it means there's one council that only has 25 voters. It has 3 councillors and they can only have council meetings when all the fishing boats come back at the same time, which may just seem completely barking. But the thing that I notice about that and all the Nordics is that they separate out the democratic control from the delivery. So the democratic control is never handed over to anybody else. Those guys working with the 25 folk that live there will make decisions about how they want services delivered. They're not employing an education director at 200,000 quid. They've got practically no staff. They commission it from the next council to get it delivered the way they want. The next council being a big council of 1,000 people. Right, that is what they have been doing for 100 years. All of the Nordics have had that level of total control locally. Now, just throwing one final thing in, they've all had proportional representation, proper STV, full proportional representation for mostly 100 years, which means they have become the kinds of society who understand that to get power, you have to share power. You have to compromise, negotiate, really be quite creative, and all parts of your society are represented. They're not hidden. So, for example, it's an unfortunate truth that if we actually had proper PR in Britain, we would have 40 UKIP MPs. And part of the reason that UKIP have this stranglehold over the media is because people kind of know that. You know, they know they're an actual force, even though they aren't represented in Parliament. So the norm for these countries is that you have to come to grips with actually, you know, the kind of politics of your world. And if you put all those things together, that's confidence. That is something that leaves you with an easy feeling of entitlement. Because actually, if you want to change things, you can vote for it and it sort of works. Whereas we have got used in Scotland to extraordinarily inefficient ways of working, to an unbelievable situation where we can't hope to buy land, to a situation where we have councils, and I'm not knocking councillors, I'm talking about structures here, where we have council structures that are just laughable. I mean, there is nothing local about them. And all of these things disempower us until it's a blimmin' miracle, actually, that Scots have still got the smedum to throw themselves at problems and try to wrestle them to the ground with no structure working for you. All these countries have structures that work for their people, whereas here we're kind of having to do everything despite them. Now, can I just invite you to imagine what would happen the day that we change this all around and we start to create structures that actually work for us? So we have a land value tax, so we have a tenant's right to buy, so we get land down to about, you know, no more than 10,000 quid an acre, less if it's remote. so we get proper local council control back. So we could have something mind-blowing like truly local councils the size of Dunoon, deciding on things like agricultural subsidies and who gets them and who doesn't get them. You need to be able to think about things like this, because that, in my mind, is what the future Scotland should be able to think about. You know, people might not want to do that. But if we don't start thinking about what we want this new thing to be like, we're not really going to unpack the possibilities and perhaps excite people who have been done down by various systems and have just become numb, basically. So that is a lot of thoughts, okay? But that, to me, is what a lot of the Faroes shows. Are there things that you want to chuck in here, questions or stuff you want to argue about? Yeah.
I'm trying to get my head.
Sorry, so that people in the live streaming thing can hear you, we need, even though I can hear you, we need to pass the microphone along. Otherwise, at this point, nobody can hear a thing. So that's great. And if you can use it like a rock star.
Trying to get my head around the state of mind.
I'm sorry to be a pain. You need to use it like a rock star. Did you never do karaoke? Never. All right, come on.
Here, try again. Is that any better, Lesley?
It will be, aye.
Okay. I'm trying to get my head around the state of the mind of the people in the Faroes in 1946. Now, at that time, they were part of Denmark. Were the local population given as much autonomy locally as they have today at that time?
No, because that's, as Björn was saying, all of that stuff, the control of taxation, the ability to write, all of that stuff came in the package that followed their independence vote. But it's true to say they still had, before that, they still had quite a lot of clout. But what they were able to do after that is things like they were able to decide to teach in Faroese, not Danish. They were able to decide to set up a university which also teaches in Faroese. They could make quite a few decisions about things like that they couldn't do before.
Okay, and next point was it was 50.6% in favour. How did they manage to get the 49.4% on board?
Well, they didn't move to independence, they moved to this highly devolved state. So effectively, although they voted yes, they ended up getting a no booby prize. But actually, having spoken to them, what was starting to happen on the islands apparently was that in that brief period where nobody knew which way the vote would go, so when it was obvious it had just gone over into the 50.6%, a lot of people thought, oh, well, if that's where the most people feel, let's just do it. So in fact, that was apparently what was pushing Denmark to have to do something pretty big, because public opinion was just beginning to swing into, oh, well, we're going to do it, which is sort of interesting, because the parallel for Scotland has always been a fearful one, that if you won by something very small, sort of Armageddon would basically erupt. And I'm not saying it wouldn't, but simply in the case of the Faroes, people became quite, philosophical about it. And again, you've got to remember that these guys are totally isolated. I mean, has anyone ever been to the Faroes in here? Oh, right, quite a few folk.
Not recently, but I've been a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even the thing, the sort of moves that they've made, like their thing about Atlantic Airways, they were served by Maersk Air, which was the Danish state carrier, and by all accounts, it was pretty flaky. It sort of brought Fly Maybe to mind to me. So they were getting flights every other day, lots of cancellations, paying through the nose, and they discovered that actually they were helping to subsidize Danish internal flights. They were paying so much. So they actually went and enticed a new small company to come in, even though they knew that when that happened, the Danes would go off in a huff and leave them with nothing. And they're in the middle of the North Atlantic. They're completely isolated, so it was a big risk. So this little company came in, and for 3 years, it did really badly. And actually, people really worried that they'd made a terrible, terrible mistake. And then they turned a corner. It's very much like the story that Atle was telling about Hidden Fjord. They lost money when they just made that decision about improving the quality of salmon and actually having to have set aside. They lost money for 3 years. They kept all their staff on. They had no salmon. And they all wondered if they were mad. And then they finally reaped the rewards of it. So now if you see the Atlantic Airways, now remember, I don't know, what's 55,000? Is that Greenock, Port Glasgow and somebody else maybe?
Smaller than Greenock,
right.
Port Glasgow.
So that is, let's say Greenock and somebody, Greenock and Guruk have got an airline with 5 jets. And what they have is they have regular destinations that are important to them. So they have regular flights to Edinburgh, Copenhagen and Reykjavik. And it's interesting that Edinburgh has always been one of their core flights that they do regularly. And then their 5th plane they go on holiday with together. So they decide where they're going each year and then they all go together to whether it's Malta or Tenerife or whatever. It is really sweet. It's like actually a big school expedition with adults. But what an amazing thing to be able to do, you know. And again, of course, the point of that is it's government owned. The point of the Faroese Telecom is that it's government owned. So the government just told Faroese Telecom to do that, the broadband. And there was none of this warped sort of privatized system that we have now got in our brains as well as in our lives, where you have to imagine all sorts of complexity and tendering out. And if anyone can explain the current rollout of broadband in less than an hour, you'll be doing well. So we've got very used to this as being how public assets are managed. And back here, they've got an old-fashioned idea, which is that a publicly owned company does it. It's competing, actually, with other private providers, but when it comes to the hardware, they did it. And actually, they're already fibre opticing, as far as I know, bits of Shetland. And they've said that they could fibre optic and get Shetland and Orkney completely, all the islands up to 4G in 2 months. If the Scottish government would let them. It's a long story, but there's a complication in all of that. So anyway, that's a long answer to what you asked, but that's the kind of level of control they've had. Yep, and a gentleman there, and then we have to have a woman asking a question. Right, yeah, there's the last there.
Thank you. I understand how ethnic people have got a right maybe to take, for instance, in the Inuit in Canada, take narwhal, they take seals, they take walrus. However, I find the looking at that pilot whale, well, basically murder. It's very, very difficult to stomach, and there's a lot of pressure from overseas about that, but they don't seem to be too bothered about. And it strikes me it's probably to do with the fact that they're so independent that they think that, well, it should go on. And to me, it reminds me of the say when they used to kill foxes, you would rub fox blood in your face when you'd got your first fox. Now, what's your view about their attitude to that, and how would you get them to change, or do you not think they should?
I think they are changing actually, but where this originates for them is they have, you saw the state of those islands. There is nothing grows on it, nothing. I was asking you saw also I was actually chairing that conference there, and I abused my privilege as chair and said, have none of you guys got polytunnels? At which point there was an explosion of laughter. Polytunnels on the Faroes, are you wise, you know? And I said, listen, mate, there's a polytunnel in Shetland. And actually that interested them. Shetland's the only place they see as having any parallel to their wind issues at all, you know. So the thing is, there's nothing grows on land. All the protein, all the food, everything that keeps everyone alive comes from the sea. And whales were regarded the same as any other fish in the sea. That was something they traditionally hunted. They'll give you long stories about the way they hunt. They hunt in a particular way that lets the whales get away. They don't do, in their eyes, factory whale farming. But what they do, what they've always traditionally done, is use the fact that they have 18 islands to have their boats out like sheepdogs, flushing the whales in. But of course what that means is when you harpoon and kill the whales, you have them on beaches, you can see what's happening, and it is absolutely revolting. When the Japanese are doing it, it's all done out at sea. The whale is wheeled up the bottom of a boat and nobody sees anything. And there's far less anger, actually, because people are not really seeing what's going on. So it's a tradition, to them, strikes me, it's actually very like the Guga hunters from Lewis. You know, they don't need the Guga anymore, but traditionally they did. And it's a sort of tradition they're still acting out, even though there's absolutely no justification in you know, food terms for needing to go and kill gannets. So there is the more that they have been brought into the public eye, and this thing, you know, their tourism has really taken off, because that Sheep View campaign just, you know, tickled the hell out of everybody. So people are now beginning to go, oh, Faroes, and it doesn't fit the rest of their image. And they understand that. So the younger ones are very ready now to say, let's just stop doing it. But the older fishermen like Morstan, fish, 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 you know, over his dead body, you know, that's never going to stop. So I think actually they're evolving themselves out of that one. Lass, where's the lass? Yep. Can we chuck the...
In Scotland in 2018, there are still large areas of deprivation and child poverty. How do they deal with that? I assume that within the Faroe Islands there are infirm and people who cannot provide for themselves. So how do they deal with that situation?
The question, in case you didn't hear it, was how they deal with poverty and people who are infirm or kind of not able to help themselves. I mean, actually, within all the Nordic countries, the aim is, and they do indeed have the smallest income gaps in the world, in the developed world. And the aim of that is actually, absolutely, to eliminate poverty and inequality. That's all the Nordics have this in common, and on every register, they're always right at the top. The Faroese is no exception. So their tax system is extremely progressive. It provides services which are excellent, and the philosophy is that the services are good enough to be attractive to the affluent, affordable for all, because that increases solidarity, encourages people to pay their taxes because they're using the services, and that creates society over and over again. It would make you weep, actually, to hear conservatives tell you that in these countries. And even, for example, Norway has had a conservative government for 6 years, which has not really unpicked that basic outlook at all. So, you know, the degree that we are grappling with absolute cruelty, naked cruelty in the form of benefit sanctions is enough to stop all these guys in their tracks. They don't know what's going on. When you have to describe that people who have had sanctions applied to them have killed themselves, they cannot believe you, because that's not the Britain that they've ever heard about. And it's not anything they experience. They just can't understand how we would be sitting letting this happen, actually. So really, they have been sort of quite removed from this. And the irony as well is that all the Nordic countries took a moment in the 30s and 40s generally, when, like us, they had a real think about a welfare state. And many of them took our welfare state as a bit of a template. But instead of, Britain kind of got halfway there and then began to dismantle it pretty well progressively from the 50s onwards. The Nordics kind of went the opposite way. They thought, God, that is a good idea, and they fully implemented it. So really, they have a system where it doesn't It doesn't kill you to be poor in these places. And if you actually, I mean, some of you may have had this experience if you've gone to a Nordic country and say, where is the poor part of town? And they just look at you. They don't know what, they'll say, oh, you mean where the immigrants live? That's as close as they can get to the concept. I mean, obviously there are income disparities, but they're just nowhere near the same as ours. So it's not that it's irrelevant, but it's just not as crushing and immediate and obvious, because they all agree that equality is good for everyone. You pass it to your...
Thanks, Lesley. Thanks, first of all, for very informative, honest and useful film, from my point of view anyway. It was excellent. It's not something I would have expected to see in the BBC at any time. But my question is, it's just a very simple one. What currency, it didn't come up in the film, what currency do they actually use? And is it tied to the Danish one, or do they have their own independent?
It is actually the Danish kroner. They haven't got a separate currency.
Right.
But I mean, as they're really saying in the film, their aim is actually to achieve economic independence first. And they're quite clear about this. They're split pretty much 50-50 still, actually. You know, after all these years, they're still roughly in the same proportion about whether to go for independence. And those who want independence, like Björk and the Republicans, their aim is to try to prove that they can go, if you like, cold turkey. So they're trying to remove, and they have actually handed back millions of kroner to Copenhagen, handed it back. So that's quite a different outlook from us, because we're always trying to get more and more and more out of London. And actually, it does make you think that the more that you get out of London, the more that people think that they're only surviving because of what they get from London. So there's actually something quite interesting and refreshing, I think, in their outlook, which is really that they have to get to a stage where they can wash their own face, roughly speaking. And, you know, they have reduced what they take from Copenhagen by something like 40% in the last 10 years. Right, I've been told to shut up now because we're going on with Iceland. Have you got, right, this is an insistent woman. Look, she's not being...
And send some to Denmark, or does it go to Denmark and then some get sent back?
I'm not absolutely certain, but I'm pretty sure that it's they collect their own taxes. But I'm not absolutely sure. Like most of the Nordics are absolutely. I mean, like if we were in Sweden tonight, only people who earn more than £35,000 a year would pay any tax to central government. Everybody else, which is pretty well everyone in this room, would only pay income tax to your local council, and by that it would be local. And I remember when I heard this the first time, I kind of looked a bit surprised, and the guy who was explaining it said to me, well, how do you do it in your country? And I thought, I wish I hadn't started this actually. I said, well, you know, we send all our tax down to London, who through gritted teeth send some back to Scotland, who through gritted teeth send some to councils that are so large we don't know anyone on them. And the guy sort of said, right, and you think we're weird? But then he said something really important. Don't you trust yourselves? What is this about having to send money right all the way along in some great intestine of validation to come right back to where it started, minus all the money that's cost for all the blooming bureaucracy of it, to come right back to your local area, which is where the services are. So the philosophy of all the Nordics, the Faroes included, is that pretty well money stays local because that's where you earn it and that's where you spend it. And it's just actually, you know, the more time you spend there, the more you come back here and just think you've gone to an alien, crazy world, actually. What was the? Are you being allowing this man to speak? Or?
Ask you at the end of the next session.
Very good. That was a good piece of negotiation there, Dave. Right. So I hope you're all okay for the next one. Right. Okay. Right. Thanks very much for waiting as well. Okay.
Scotland is changing. What kind of country could we become? Let me show you. Come with me as I explore Scotland's powerful and inspiring wee European neighbours. What vision do they offer of a brighter future for Scotland? Iceland, almost 500 miles north of Scotland, this subarctic nation is bigger than Scotland with less than 10% of our population. This place is a bit misnamed because almost a third of the lava flows on Earth have flowed on this island. There are 8 volcanoes about to erupt anytime over the next 50, 100, but maybe next year. And there have probably been 12 earthquakes already this morning. But somehow, despite living with this constant threat, the Icelanders have created one of the most equal, successful societies on Earth, even bounding back after their recent near bankruptcy. How on earth do they do it? To understand Iceland, you must learn to love volcanoes. They've shaped the landscape, the people, and their resilient mindset. To find out more, I've come to talk to Paul Einarsson at the University of Iceland. The volcanoes that have erupted here have had some massive consequences for the world. There's a suggestion that one eruption actually caused the French Revolution.
Icelandic volcanoes are certainly very active and they can certainly produce very dangerous eruptions, which have caused not only local problems but also global catastrophes, like the 1783 eruption of Laki, poisoning all the vegetation in Iceland, and it caused a famine that killed about 1/5 of the population. It caused a lot of problems on mainland Europe. The French Revolution, there has been a connection put between those. It caused such great harm to farmers in Europe. It probably changed the weather pattern on the whole globe. There is at least an idea that it caused widespread famine in India and Chinese, where it killed maybe millions of people.
How do Icelanders live really with the level of threat that there is from the volcanoes and the physical environment?
All you hear about earthquakes or volcanoes on the news is from disasters. So people tend to associate these two things together, where an earthquake has to be a disaster. And it's generally not considered to be such a terrible event if an eruption breaks out. We have 30 volcanoes to worry about. An eruption on the average about every 2 or 3 years. Most of the everyday threat that we have comes from the weather. The glaciers are shrinking. A lot of our electricity is produced by glacial rivers. So global change is really having a big effect.
How does the infrastructure work? Because if you have pipes over all of this, surely they must all fracture and there must be huge repairs.
To be precise, it's about 19 millimeters per year that East and West Iceland are spreading apart. That's about this much. You have to repair a line here, you have to repair a road because it gets torn apart. This is not a part of the big catastrophe. It's just almost like a maintenance.
I've got to say the most impressive story I heard was the eruption on the Westman Islands, which surely would have probably meant the end of the islands, but actually it seemed to me the start of having a better harbour.
The eruption of Heimaey in 1973 was really quite a unique occurrence. The whole town of 5,000 people was evacuated in a few hours during a night in the middle of the winter. And the biggest danger to the town as such was the closure of the harbour. And one of the methods that people had been experimenting with was to pump water, seawater, on the lava front to stop it or to try to divert it. And it actually succeeded in stopping it, so that when the eruption finally ended, the harbour was better than before, because it was better sheltered. It was a mixture of ingenuity and luck, But that's how it ended. If there was not this hotspot, there would be no Iceland. We would be sitting on the ocean bottom at 2 or 3 kilometers depth, and we would not be human beings. We would be starfish or something else. And this is it's quite close to the thinking of many Icelanders that volcanoes are certainly dangerous, but they are also the reason for our existence. There is an interesting connection between Scotland and Iceland in that when the Iceland hotspot became active about 50 to 70 million years ago, then Scotland and Greenland were lying side by side. The Atlantic Ocean had not started forming, and the Iceland hotspot produced volcanoes. And it produced volcanoes, and these volcanoes are of course then in Greenland and in Scotland. So the Scottish volcanic areas, like in Skye and other places in Scotland, these are really the first signs of the Iceland hotspot. These are really Icelandic volcanoes. Most of people's ideas about how volcanoes look on the inside come from Scotland. Scotland is really the cradle of volcanology.
What do you do when you live on an island that's covered with lava like this? Well, you dig deep. Here at the ON power station, Icelanders harness the island's immense geothermal energy for industry and homes. 99% of housing in the Reykjavik area is space heated with hot water from these natural geothermal sources. It's another example of how Icelanders create a positive from their seemingly barren landscape. And here's something else we've dug up. A Scot.
Yes.
Heard the accent. Austin Yule, you're a tour leader taking groups from Canada today around here. What do you see what just really strikes you, because you're so experienced at taking strangers and perhaps Scots to Iceland? What really hits you and what hits the people that you take?
Well, first of all, it's the unusualness of this land. They see such a small nation of less than 350,000 people with so much going on. As we would call it in Scotland, a Protestant work ethic here. So they're Protestant Lutheran here. And the idea is everybody is working towards a common goal of trying to harness the power and the energy and all the resources they have in this huge country with this small population. Every time I come here, I have a new group when I work, and I tell them all about the volcanoes and the earthquakes we have. Hekla here hasn't gone off in 18 years and is scheduled for every 10, and Katla, 60 to 90 years, hasn't gone for 100 years. But people here are just getting on with it.
You can look at something that might obliterate you and still see an opportunity in there. What does that make you think about Scotland?
I think as a nation we have become quite risk averse. We look at opportunities and we say, someone else will do that, someone else will do that, and we'll maybe join on. We're perhaps not leaders in that field, and we very much should be.
So would you love to take the whole of Scotland here for a week?
Yes, I would love to turn the people of Scotland round and say, stop looking south, look north, look at these Nordic countries and what they're achieving.
And with the right vision, Iceland's ability to realise the potential of its barren land can be almost miraculous. Knitto, when we came here today, this was like an oasis. It wasn't very good weather, there wasn't an awful lot to see, and then suddenly, wow.
Just the name Iceland is not give you that clue that we can be growing many things here, but it surprised many people that we couldn't be picking tomatoes every day of the year, knowing that we have long, dark and cold winter. And like you said, we use the help from our nature to make it possible. So we use the hot water in the ground to warm up our houses. And here in our village, we have our own hot spring and 2 boreholes. So the water is almost boiling when it comes in here. It's about 90-95 degrees warm. And then we use our electricity to make sun or light for the plant every day of the year. And in Iceland, we can be proud that all our electricity are green-making electricity. We have specialized in tomatoes, and today we are sending 1 ton of tomatoes to the market every day. We have a horse show and a stable visit, and then also to come into the greenhouse and see what we are doing there. Last year, 2017, we had more than 160,000 guests coming, and also it shows us opportunity to twist together like agriculture and tourism, because I think it's so real, something which so many people have interest for.
How did the financial crash affect you? Because I imagine it probably made it better to be having homegrown tomatoes, because imports must have been so expensive.
It was difficult times, because also everything which we was buying in was double priced. So it was a difficult time, but a good time also that people really start to think about how important it is to have our own production. And people start to appreciate it even more better to have Icelandic agriculture. People are more thinking about the carbon footprint, because to be traveling around the world with the food which you can easily grow or make in your own country, it's so stupid. I mean, we are going to give the world to our children, to our grandchildren. We really have to think about that. So I think the crisis helped to have the right thinking of these things also.
You know, this place is hugely impressive, but the other thing is the soup tastes great too. Icelanders don't only harness the natural resources of their island for energy and food, but also for relaxation.
Icelanders really like to go swimming or relaxing into hot tubs and pools. So this is like really popular not only for the tourist people, but also for the Icelanders to come here and relax, to go into our natural pool, which is really warm and cozy. And also because we have access to the lake, and people go into a cold lake and warm pools then afterwards. That's really nice.
Iceland has capitalised on its unique landscape with blockbusting effect, as filmmaker Kolfinna Balvinsdóttir explains.
We have had the program ongoing for 18 years now, that the state reimburses filmmakers who come from abroad all the VAT of the whole budget that they spend here. So that has been a great attraction for Hollywood production films. And that means that they come here with 200-300 people to spend the summer here. They can film 24 hours. And that obviously means that they can hire, we the people in this sector, we are provided with jobs. And obviously we could say that that has also been a part of our learning process. You know, you learn a lot from these people.
It's so far, so far away. It's so far, so far.
Make your own flag. Make your own flag.
Björk, our singer, she actually paved the way for us. She became a superstar, and that has caused lots of attention.
Raise your flag.
Could get so many famous artists to come here, and obviously that helps us in the creativity. We actually per capita are doing very well when it comes to music, literature, filmmaking, etc. We are very well protected by our state. We have funds that we can easily access. Well, I've mostly been doing documentary films about social issues in particular, and I'm now writing a film about immigrants coming to Iceland. The nature is a great help for us to keep the mind vivid and keep this creativity up. In school, we do actually study music and literature and knitting and carpentry, and it's as a part of our curriculum. There has been a great interest in Nordic literature, detective stories, for example. It doesn't relate to me because we don't have any crime rate in Iceland, so I find it kind of difficult to imagine that. But I think that is also a great advertisement for the country, that these kind of programs become popular abroad. very strong identity, yes. We are very proud of being who we are. We are winning everybody in football, including the English.
And we would love that the whole Tartan army and all of Scotland would join Team Iceland and cheer with us this summer.
I mean, anything is better than pretending to support England, right?
Somehow people often think, because we are only 358,153 people at the moment, somehow people often think that if you come from a small country that you will think smaller. But I actually think it's vice versa. The smaller the unity, the better it functions, the better opportunities you have in life, and therefore you think bigger. When you ask me, I actually don't think I've ever seen a Scottish film. And I wonder why the Scottish are progressing so slowly. But I do feel for them, and I am a true follower of their independence. I think that we should leave England all alone.
Gott kvöld.
And part of that film's success is because Iceland's pretty well served in broadcasting too. And remember, their population's no bigger than Aberdeen and Dundee combined.
So RUV stands for Ríkisútvarpið, which literally translates into state radio in English, meaning it's the public broadcaster, public service broadcaster of Iceland. The scope of what we do is fairly broad. I mean, we run a fairly extensive website which covers everything from children's services to news to catch-up services to sports. On radio, we have several channels, and then we run some online radio services. We just started a online radio station aimed at younger people, so up until maybe the age of 30, seeing how that works. We have actually have an increased commitment to drama in recent years. Now I think there's probably around 4 series on an annual basis, which is quite a lot when you consider how small both RUV and Iceland are. Nordic Noir, of course, has created a boom for drama everywhere, and that also means that we have increased access to funding from those who want to co-produce what we do. We've co-produced drama with the Germans, with the BBC, with many others. The biggest one, the most expensive one, which was shown all over the world, I mean, I think we paid probably 10% of the cost. It's Icelandic production, Icelandic actors, and an Icelandic script in Icelandic in Iceland. I think it sounds strange, but I think our importance when it comes to sort of the national identity and sort of holding a mirror up to ourselves has increased, partly because of the economic crisis and everything that happened after 2008. But also because there's a lot of stuff coming in from abroad, all those streaming services and satellite channels and whatnot, and it's easy to get lost in that mixture, and RÚV, with its focus on Icelandic news, Icelandic stories, Icelandic life, Icelandic sports, Icelandic people, Icelandic language, I think we play a fairly significant role in not maintaining sort of the hype of what we are and who we are, but sort of critically reflecting on who we are and who we would like to be.
Iceland's geology has even shaped its politics. Westminster makes a claim to being the mother of parliaments, but this most definitely is the great-grandmother of the lot. This is the world's earliest parliament here at Thingvellir. It's right at the centre of the island, and it's been used as a parliament since 930 because it was an equal distance for everyone to travel to get here, even though this is right at the heart of the volcanic area, and it's almost at the point where 2 tectonic plates are pulling apart constantly. It was used as a parliament until 1790, when a massive eruption caused the people and the parliament to seek the shelter of Reykjavik. But the story didn't stop at Thingvellir. The parliament moved here to Reykjavik, literally the big smoke. And I'm here to meet Rósa Björk Brynjólfsdóttir, who's an MP, and she's going to tell us more. We know that Iceland had the world's oldest parliament, but what was its history after that big beginning, sitting in the rocks at Thingvellir? It moved to Reykjavik, and what happened next?
We had the sovereignty in 1918. We're celebrating that now, 100 years of sovereignty. We had also the independence of Iceland in 1944. So that was a huge milestone after the parliament came here.
you could say you were the poorest country in Europe, and yet in 1944 you became independent without a second thought.
In the 17th and 18th century, Iceland was regarded as a very valuable place, not because of the fish or the geothermal power like we do today, but because we had sulfur mines. Sulfur mines. So that was one of the reasons why the King of Denmark wanted to keep Iceland and trade this monopoly within Iceland as well. The Danes, as a colony country, you can say they didn't treat us very well. So they didn't allow any Icelanders to get some situation or power within their own country. And the condition of life for Icelanders had been extremely hard for many centuries, actually. Some Danes were disappointed towards the Icelanders that as soon as Denmark was occupied by the Germans, the Icelanders grabbed the opportunity and declared independence. The parliament at the time met in Alþingi, and there the Parliament of Iceland declared independence, just sent the King of Denmark a letter.
So this was characteristic of Iceland. There was no violence, no bloodshed. It was just a very rational thing.
The ones that were steering the independence movement were studying in Copenhagen, in Denmark. So these were people of education and literature. And Jón Sigurðsson was a man of literature, and we sometimes say and use the word or phrases that this was a revolution of the pen. This was something that was written about constantly, and the Icelanders actually used the pen and words and letters to put their issue forward, which I believe is a very beautiful way to do it.
Is part of that culture the Celtic connection?
I would say so, yes. I would say so, because our DNA is, of course, as has been measured and shown, 60% approximately Norwegian, and then 40% of the Celtic Islands and northern part of Scotland. And this Celtic history is very, very alive in Icelandic culture. It has always been. And it's quite interesting to think about it, that the Celtic side is stronger among female in Iceland. So the storytelling and the history and the verbal storytelling, you can assume that comes from women in Iceland.
And in your whole history, has that always been the case, that no one has had any doubt, really, that you would be better as an independent country?
No. It was in line with the wish of the people and the nation. And I think when you have been feeling these difficult living conditions on your skin for so many centuries, then you're a bit fed up with that, and more than that. And when you get some kind of belief and self-confident in the fact that you can be better off. Of course, it's a journey that you don't know where it ends. But every good journey, you have to start them somewhere. And I think that the majority of Iceland, the enormous majority of Iceland was, at the time, very positive and happy about that.
Are you special?
I think Icelanders are special as any other countries are, and any other people and populations are. I think what is interesting with the Icelandic population is that it's very mixed. It's an island, of course, with a strong heritage and culture, a little bit like the Scottish and the other North Atlantic peoples. I think that the Icelanders, they always look at themselves as they can do anything. There are no limits. And that can both be a very positive power, but also it can also be something that it can hinder you in doing maybe things in a civilized way.
Á þann hátt íslenska bjartsýni, æðruleysi og samstöðu að vopni munum við standa storminn á okkur.
But no matter how resilient a nation you may be, there are global events you never see coming. The 2008 crash was a seismic financial event that brought Iceland to its knees. In many ways, the Harpa Concert Hall and Conference Centre came to symbolise the crash. This distinctive glass structure, inspired by the basalt landscape of Iceland, with its precarious-looking walkways and stunning perspectives, was commissioned during the heady days when Iceland was on a roll. After its mighty fall, the building remained half-built, resented by many as an example of national excess and overconfidence. But Harpa was finished and is now a magnet for locals and visitors who've played a vital role in Iceland's economic recovery. Jon Baldwin Hannibalsson can explain more about Iceland's crash. What caused the financial crash in Iceland?
After the crash, Parliament appointed 3 wise men to give a thorough analysis with full resources and foreign expertise on the causes of the crash. On the technicalities of the financial system, they said, it is as if the owners of the Icelandic banks operated on the premise that the best way to rob a bank is to own a bank. Almost every basic rule of prudence was broken, be it risk management, market manipulation, insider trading, heavy lending to related companies, even owned by the owners of the banks, creative accounting, you know, everything. And this was the basis for another thing which we did correctly, which was to bring to justice those individuals, plutocrats, high officials in the banks who had actually not only turned out to be financial crooks, but broke the law. All of this was, of course, under the overall influence of the ideology of neoliberalism. The government at the time actually wrote it into the programs that the purpose was to make Iceland a financial center. The mantra was market fundamentalism, markets were sovereign, markets were infallible, minimum state interference. That was the program. We have learned a lot about ourselves. It inspired a spontaneous grassroots movement which wanted to rewrite the constitution.
Would it be true to say that Gordon Brown, in a strange kind of way, actually helped Iceland come out of the financial crash?
It was their decision to place not only the Icelandic banks in London, but the Central Bank of Iceland and the government of Iceland on the list under the law of Terrorism Act. This is even worse than a declaration of war because it's a license for annihilation almost. So the whole financial system of Iceland went bankrupt. There was no way that those banks could be bailed out, unlike, for instance, in Greece or in Ireland. The creditors, mainly German banks, were forced to write off a lot of the debt. It is a part of the explanation why Iceland recovered sooner and in a more robust way than most others.
So are you saying then that you really want to thank Gordon Brown?
If I would say that, my countrymen would not be very grateful to me. But I stress that this was not what he meant to do.
Sure. When you were foreign minister, you went to Lithuania during its important moments of trying to become an independent country. Why did you think that was Iceland's problem? Why did you go?
Gorbachev was ready to do a lot, but he set the limit to this. He would never accept the dissolution of the Soviet Union. The independence struggle of the Baltic states was about leaving the Soviet Union for the simple reason that they had been occupied, they had been annexed into the Soviet Union illegally and against their will.
Would it be fair to say that actually your recognition of Lithuania was what helped that country become independent?
It's too much to say that we saved them, they saved themselves. But your point is well taken. There are times when the big guys fail or have a different agenda, when small countries, through their solidarity, can actually change the course of events.
Volcanic ash has caused the worst disruption in air travel since 9/11.
Incredibly, a volcanic eruption then grounded much of Europe. But again, this was an opportunity to put Iceland on the map.
The first days of the volcanic eruption were of course a crisis. In the back of our heads, I think, was that this was a strange opportunity as well. We realized that Iceland was in the focus of the world like never before. The currency of the Icelandic krona had devalued so much that Iceland became affordable for tourists more than before. The first thing was a new marketing plan, which was focused on Iceland as an adventure destination. The growth has been phenomenal in all senses, both for the company and for Icelandic tourism. Maybe those two events coincided in our favor.
The crash also led to a re-energised Icelandic politics, with citizens engaging and reflecting on their future like never before.
It was a really interesting time when everything seemed possible.
Writer Andri Snær Magnusson explored this new way of thinking about Iceland in his fascinating book, Dreamland, a self-help manual for a frightened nation.
If you go downtown to the business center of Reykjavik, you can see the White House, where Reagan and Gorbachev met, where communism fell. The house next door is the third biggest crash in capitalist history. That is the headquarters of Kaupthing Bank. So you'd see the crash of capitalism and communism side by side.
Kaupthing is the biggest company in Iceland. It's a company where you get all the benefits of a huge, global, multi-million... I mean, how many millions live in Iceland?
300,000.
300,000 million?
No, just 300,000.
Ah, so Kaupthing is the biggest company in this tiny little country.
These regimes would, give you a code of language, how to use, how to talk. And suddenly that had collapsed and the other had collapsed and the language was suddenly like free. What do you say when you don't have a firm ground to speak on?
Your book, which I read, and actually I have to say, inspired me to write a book in Scotland called Blossom, which was similarly trying to tackle all the difficult problems of our countries, is really seems to be trying to say there's a struggle for the heart of Iceland going on.
Well, basically we had this strange situation where politicians told us that unless we would get 4 or 5 huge aluminum smelters running in Iceland, we would not have a welfare system and all these things that we want as a prosperous nation. And they were saying we would have to sacrifice the highlands of Iceland, many of the most beautiful rivers in Iceland, and many of the greatest geothermal areas, that we would have to plunder them in order to have welfare and just be an independent, prosperous nation. And this was something people actually strongly believed.
Gríðarlegu framkvæmdir munu hafa mikið að segja fyrir okkar efnahagslíf Þær munu færa okkur mikla hagsæld á komandi árum.
Og hvað segja Húsvíkingar?
We were not told that this was a choice to be made, but this was some kind of an ultimatum, that we had to do this, make a deal with 3, 4, 5 aluminum corporations. And I thought this was devastating. I thought this was just terrible. Many of my favorite places in the Highlands, many of the most beautiful areas, were to be just bulldozed to serve these corporations. But there was something that really troubled me as a citizen. And I was wondering, what are they saying? You know, what is this language they're using? What are they telling us? And, you know, somebody says 30 terawatt hours. And, you know, it sounds wise, it sounds like something thought out, it sounds scientific, and it would be on the headlines of newspapers. Still, we have only harnessed 15% of the 30 terawatt hours we are going to sell. And when I calculated how many rivers you would have to dam to reach 30 terawatt hours, you would have to take all the rivers in the west, all the rivers in the north, all the rivers in the east and the south, and the Central Highlands, and still we needed about 2 terawatt hours. So they were promising they could harness a little bit more than all the rivers in Iceland. And then I was like, okay, something is deeply wrong here. And suddenly me as a concerned citizen could see huge faults in what looked like firm, stable, and should be conservative bodies of the government. And that the language they were using was just total bullshit. It was just bullshit. It was just, and me as a fantasy writer, I was suddenly in the role of grounding our engineers, telling them, I'm doing, my role is fantasy, your role is reality, and you should tell me the truth. In the end, I could find like, what would be left in the economy would be the wages of the workers. So you could see how you can colonize people's minds into believing somebody being the pillar of your economy, while you are actually their pillar. That is, we are providing Alcoa with billions of dollars in benefits, while they are providing us, yes, they are occupying the time of 400 people that could also be doing something else. And then the deeper thing was this insecurity. There was some kind of deep insecurity embodied in the psyche of the nation. It could easily be harnessed politically. There is this kind of old survival struggle, this strength, all these elements that used to be strengths possibly, turned out in this case to be weaknesses that could be harnessed and almost colonized. So in my book I was writing that, yes, maybe in some way it is a part solution for them, but in other ways they are sacrificing their independence. They're actually giving off all their power to an aluminum company that has not been doing well in many places of the world. And when they want to leave a similar village, they just leave it. They're not in there for the welfare. I thought somebody has to point out the alternatives. And if you harness all these small things, the overall kind of success of that will be bigger than a single smelter.
The new Icelandic politics produced radical ways of thinking about how politics could be done, including revising the nation's very foundation of democracy, the constitution. You were one of the people that put together the crowdsourced constitution, which has actually entrapped everybody, ensnared everybody's attention across the world for its boldness. What was the reason for needing to do that?
Well, Iceland became independent in 1944. Let's start back. Big Bang. We have Big Bang. No, but sorry, I have to explain. Because after that, we decided, okay, Danes were occupied by the Nazis, so we're just going to sneak away, because we've been trying for ages to get away, and finally we had a moment there. So we were doing that, and we said, okay, let's just have the constitution from Denmark, change the word king with president, and run. So we just voted on the two things. Do we want to be independent? Secondly, do we want this to be the constitution? And everybody was in agreement that this should only be a preliminary constitution. However, now, 70 years later, we still have that old Danish crappy constitution, you know, and we've always intended to write our own. It's part of being a real independent nation, in my opinion, to have your own social contract. So why would you be a society or a nation if you can't even agree upon your own foundational law? And then after the crash in Iceland in 2008, there was this amazing moment of clarity, you know, where people finally were like, okay, so hang on, why are we doing this? You know, why do we have the law? Why do we have all the system? What we thought we had was completely not working, so now we have to make a new one. And then finally there was this like enough sort of general support, especially from the power holders, to actually do this, you know, well. So they decided, okay, we've been trying to do this for years without any success ourselves. Let's give it to the people. So they had this amazing National Assembly with 1,000 randomly selected people coming together for a whole day in a sports complex, just deciding upon the values of that new constitution. And then after that, and that was all streamed and online and so on, that was back in 2011. And after that, they had the elections where 25 people got elected, including myself. And we decided, after a little bit of a stubbly beginning, that we would try to be the change. So let's open it up. We're asking them to be transparent, our power holders. We're asking them to be accountable. Let's do that then ourselves. So we only had one IT guy, and we were doing this all on the run. We only had 4 months to write the thing. But we decided to, okay, let's just do this, you know. Let's do it and let everybody comment on it and see what we're doing as we do it.
Son of Philosophy says ideas from the public should always be welcome, but much thought and effort ought to be required to make them politically viable.
How did you manage that? We connected our website to Facebook. Every week we published a draft. So first time we published it, it was just the chapters, you know, and people could comment through their Facebook account saying like, okay, why isn't this in front of this or whatever, you know? And when we first published it online, we were really scared because, you know, the way people can talk online sometimes is just foul, you know. Yeah. So we thought, okay, they're going to go like at us, you know, and it's going to be one ugly mess, you know. But that did not happen at all. And actually what happened was that the people, they sort of repaid the trust that we gave them with a lot of dignity in the conversation. So we got great ideas coming from the people through that site, and also people could just send us proposals. We also, of course, reached out a lot to the experts and, you know, drew them in. But basically the openness of it was not only just to get more ideas and to make it sort of more wide, but also to create ownership, you know, that we together would do this, you know. It's about democracy in the whole. It's about if people should believe that we can actually deepen democracy as a concept, or if we should just forget about it. Because we're looking at the same trends everywhere, where people are losing trust in the representatives. They don't bother to show up. They feel they can't have any say in anything, and power is somewhere completely different than to where they're at. Nobody listens to them. This is so understandable. Why should I participate in a dance that isn't really about me or for me, or even, I don't even like the tune playing in the background, you know, why should I? So we need to try to use examples like this in Iceland, where people have actually been able to participate, and they've delivered something much greater than if they wouldn't have participated, and make it into reality to show that this is a viable path, you know.
And what would you say at the moment are the odds of this actually happening?
The surveys show that the support is only rising. So you're not going to ignore this. There's no way that you can. I don't know if we will get it exactly the same way that we wrote it, but we will get it as the basis for a new constitution. I am 100% sure.
So, what do our Icelanders think about Scotland and its future?
Norway is the most successful country on earth in how to utilize their natural resources. You can learn a lot from how they have done it, both in terms of efficiency and profitability, but also in terms of meeting ecological standards and sustainability.
My feeling is that you're in the right path, or Scots are in the right path of thinking very carefully about a second referendum. I'm not very positive on Brexit. I'm not very positive on the result of the Brexit. So I'm not very positive that the Scots will gain something on Brexit.
Do you think Scotland has the resources to be able to be a prosperous, independent country?
Absolutely, without a doubt.
Why do you think we doubt it?
I think it's easier for an island who is long and far away from the Parliament or the King or the Queen or whatever. I think it's easier than being very close to the one that you have been in alliance with for centuries.
I mean, what would you say to Scots who actually are perhaps more risk averse than you are?
Mm-hmm. If you look at it, where is the vehicle going? Is this a nice direction? Is this where we want to steer our vehicle? Because we have a choice. I would ask that question. And if it seems like, yeah, it's not hazardous, it's sort of no risks involved, and that's enough for you, and you think that's going to make your kids okay in the future, fine. But if you think you can go to a more beautiful location and you can find something more spectacular and maybe more sustainable for your kids and their kids, and just take the turn, I would say.
I don't know a single individual anywhere in the world who has the slightest doubt that Scotland has all the intellectual capacity, all the technical know-how, all the historical, cultural resources to go it along to be an independent country, yes.
And I want to say to Scottish people that might be listening, nothing's going to happen just by sitting there and hoping. You know, you have to actually do stuff. And I know you've been fighting a lot and I know you're tired, but you have to continue. It's totally worth it.
Well, it's been another extraordinary 4 days here on Iceland. The overwhelming message that you get from everybody is their sheer ability to cope with problems that really would have flattened any other country. There's Iceland Air. The minute that the country goes belly up financially, they see it as an opportunity to get people here because finally the place is affordable, and they go to the government and buy planes. Geologists who actually say that if there weren't volcanoes here and therefore the constant threat of eruption, the island wouldn't exist and they wouldn't be on it and they wouldn't be Icelanders. You hear from Kolfina, who is part of the huge filmmaking industry here because of their landscape, and their landscape is a certain kind of one, but you know, Scotland's is infinitely more beautiful and diverse, and she has never seen a single Scottish film. It all makes you wonder what we're doing with the huge resources we've got, and whether or not we can rise to the challenge that Catherine Oddsdottir has raised to us, which is whether we can embrace uncertainty because in it something beautiful awaits.
If you'd like to see more films about our successful wee neighbours, please support our crowdfunder.
But just this business of how matter-of-factly people accept that they're living on an island that's trying to kill them every waking moment of the day is just unbelievable. Now, if you go online to look for the Icelandic weather forecast, you get a seismic reading. You know, that's how constant it is. And it's true that the day that we filmed the beginning or the end, there had actually been 12 earthquakes. And that was a quiet day. I mean, there were wee earthquakes, right enough. You know, I mean, I didn't register any of them, but they had actually happened. And, you know, if you were of the mental outlook that you needed absolute guarantees about everything in life, you couldn't live there. There's one place. How many people have been to Iceland? Right, the party people. Well, there's one little village, if you went on the Golden Circle tour, you would go past it, a place called Verdegerde, and it's sitting right on the hot springs area. And it's great because, you know, you can build a conservatory over a hot spring, and then you can end up like the other place further over in the island, and you can have your own cucumbers in the middle of the winter. You can have bananas, you can have tomatoes. It's fantastic until the hot springs move under your bedroom and you're dead. And I mean, that has actually happened. And so people who live in that village actually cannot get commercial insurance. The government insures them. That's how difficult that is. And then, you know, when you see the case of the Westman Islands, I did, when I heard that story, I couldn't believe it, because to me it encapsulates Iceland completely, that everyone kept the heed and realised that there might just be a tiny little opportunity in this complete wipeout that was happening, which was to just finish that little bit of the harbour over there, you know, which they did. And the date of that in 1973, when the Westman Islands was not over as a place and actually restored itself, is now a public holiday in Iceland, because they rate that kind of thing a lot. Katrin, that you saw at the end there, who's a redoubtable woman, and although she looks very, you know, relaxed, she looks quite young and all the rest of it, she's a QC. She took time off being a top lawyer in Iceland to do the crowdsourced constitution because she believes in it so much. But she was telling me when she was 8 or 9, she was at school and the teacher came in and said, Katrin, both your parents are here actually and they need to see you urgently. And she thought, oh my God, both of them, this has got to be really serious. And she thought, geez, my sister must be dead or something. So she went out and the teacher left her to the parents, shut the door, and her mother just kind of leant over, put her hand on Katrin's arm and said, Katrin, there's the most extraordinary volcano happening there and we're all going to go and have a look at it. Come on. And actually, that was happening all over Iceland. People were just disappearing off to watch the volcanoes, you know, because they are great entertainment. That's the way they are looked at until they cross over a line and kind of kill you. So this is an extraordinarily different mindset these guys have. And then the final bit of it that really strikes me a lot was actually the story of Jon Baldvin Hannibalsson actually intervening in Lithuania. Now, you know, at that point, Iceland was probably about 250,000 people. You know, a barren rock trying to actively kill its inhabitants with 250,000 people changed history. And when I asked him, you may know, I run a group called Nordic Horizons that takes over Nordic specialists to speak in the Scottish Parliament. And we've been doing that for 8 years. We've had more than 40 people over. And usefully, they talk to, you know, gatherings there, but they also meet the civil servants. And there's now a network within the Scottish Civil Service that meets our speakers, and there can be between 40 to 70 civil servants turn up to get a different idea of how to run a country, which I hope has been kind of useful. But we held a big event 2 years ago after Brexit to sort of try and get our heads round all the different ways that the Nordics were looking at Brexit and handled their relations with Europe. And Jon Baldvin came from Iceland, modestly sat at the top, talked about Iceland's halfway house, which it occupies with Norway, again, because they don't want to be in the common fisheries policy. So the halfway house, which Jon Baldvin actually helped create, the EEA, that allows you to be out of the common fisheries policy. You have to pay a shed load of money. You get no say in any of the rules. In Norway, it's known as the Nike deal. Just do it. But it's better for them than the alternatives. And you have to abide by freedom of movement. You have to accept the 4 fundamentals of the EU, even in the halfway house, which is why Britain will never be able to join. So anyway, here's Jon Baldvin sitting there. I didn't know anything about this about him. It was only later when we made a little book out of what we'd found, which is called McSmorgasbord, and Jon Baldvin was writing the Iceland chapter, And I thought, you know, people will think, who the heck are these people? So I'd better write a wee bit about who they are, fluff it up a bit. So I started looking into Jon Baldvin Hannibalsson and discovered he'd gone to Lithuania in 1991 in these circumstances, had walked into the middle of 14 people being killed in the Lithuanian capital, and had walked straight into the middle of that and just declared Iceland's recognition for their independence. So I said to him, what on earth really made you think you had to do that? And he didn't answer so fully on the film, but he said, well, you know, we sat in Iceland and looked at what was happening, and we thought what the West is doing is it's so keen that Gorbachev doesn't go back to communism that it's willing to overlook everything else. All the stuff that's happening in Lithuania, minor transgression. This is the same West that was happy to deal with dictators who were eliminating huge parts of their population in Africa on the basis that the dictator you know is better than the dictator you don't know. So they looked at that and said, do you know something? That is, first of all, morally wrong, but it also is wrong for us because it's in our interests as a small country to have more small countries in the world. So this is something we have to act about because small countries have to try to create more. And Iceland is probably the only country in the world, and I think it's still true that they have a default support for any country becoming independent because they just want more small countries. They think that's just a good thing. So once they'd had that conversation, Jon Baldvin, as the foreign minister, realised it was him. So he just, you know, put his Jim Jams in a kind of bag, went off on the plane and did what he did. After he'd intervened in Lithuania, Latvia was next, then Estonia. And on each occasion, the first person to recognise the independence of those countries was Jon Baldvin Hannibalsson for Iceland. What an amazing thing that is, to have that level of confidence and to be a player when you've got such a tiny population. I mean, as Kolfina said, it actually is counterintuitive. The smaller it is, the more tightly knit everybody seems to be, and the more you seem to be able to act. So they are quite extraordinary, but of course they have such a strong feeling that there are no limits that they go completely bonkers, which was the financial crash. And, you know, that is something all of them wanted to talk about. There was a stage where we didn't want to go into it too much more. Everyone said, we have to talk about this because this has kind of crippled us. And some people find the bit with Andrew Snare Magnusson a bit hard to follow. But the point he's trying to make is the struggle for genuine independence never ends. Because what Iceland is facing now, the big kind of division in their politics, is green versus brown, if you want. Because what the big arguments are about is whether the whole of Iceland should simply be handing its hydro energy to Alcoa, an aluminium company. Is that the best future? Is that the only future for Iceland? And lots of the younger ones are saying, absolutely not. And actually, the small little enterprises that are culturally based, arts-based, film-based, we can make a living with this. We can change and make Iceland work like that. We don't need to hand our land and everything wholesale to some large companies who are colonizing your mind about how much you're relying on them for your success as a country. So that's really worth getting, because the idea that you just get over the line and then, you know, it's all over. There's always these debates to be had, and the Icelanders are still having them very vigorously. So that's some thoughts on that. Now, there's a gentleman who kind of wanted to ask the question the last time. Are you still on it? Yeah. Right.
I'll give you this guy for the killer question. Speak into that.
Right.
No, don't touch it, mate.
What did I say?
Just ask your question.
Do you think we'll get independence?
Is that a killer question? Right. Okay, so if anyone didn't hear that, kind of particularly watching live, that was, do you think we'll get independence? Yes, absolutely I do. When? Right, do you know something? It's this may be sacrilege. That seems a lot less important to me. Well, yes, but actually, right. But so here we are now in a different situation, and I think we need to start. Well, first of all, I think we can be confident that behind the scenes, a lot of people are thinking about things. Now, actually, the Scots, I think, are a bit grabby as a people, and I think that arises from centuries of not being sure what you're entitled to, and not being certain that opportunities that are in front of you now will still be there in 10 minutes. So we tend to grab just to make sure that we get it done. I think that slightly explains why we don't have a bit of a stop mechanism on food, booze, anything. And we have to think that these opportunities are not there like for 1 minute, and if you don't just manage to gather all your energies about it, it won't be there anymore. Because to be honest, that's a crazy way to look at a big change like this for a country. You've got to think also about the way that people make up their minds about things. Now, I don't know about you, but I deeply resent people telling me what to think. I am not a letterbox. I do not like messages. I can take things in, and I don't change my mind right there and then. I don't change my behaviour like that. I consider things. And it's bolstered by all sorts of stuff. How crap Westminster is, how cruel a lot of the stuff that's coming out of them is, how patently inadequate the politicians are. It all begins to filter in. But, if I had been a no voter, I still would be keeping my powder dry until I actually had to make another choice. So I think there's a lot of quiet changing going on at the moment by people who don't want to be made to look stupid. So, and your question, I know this sounds sort of like not what you want to hear. Scotland will become independent when the majority of people are ready for it. And that depends on events that are out with our control, like what's happening in Westminster, Brexit and all that kind of thing, like what might be happening in Ireland as they move towards reunification, which is another process that now looks pretty inevitable, but again, doesn't have a date on it. So our job is to keep politely and confidently opening up the ideas of what this new Scotland can be like. Because if you are acting as if you are living in the early days of a better nation, and you're actually beginning to talk about the destination, not the date, the time, when we have who's eligible to vote, that's all detail. We've got to get our peckers up now, I think, and look over this into what lies ahead. Yep. And remember, we need women asking questions as well.
We don't have an awful lot of time, it has to be said, so we're very, very grateful to the proprietors of the cinema. We're long past the time of which we actually hired the hall. So,
well, why don't we take 3 questions and
yes.
I'll make a quick answer on them
Yes.
all. Is that all right?
That's a good
But there
idea.
has to be a woman ask a question, or it's just don't do this. Seriously. Yep.
To take up the last points that were made in the film, Iceland has a tiny population and very, very limited resources, far fewer than Scotland. With that in mind, how do you convince the 55% of the Scottish population who voted against independence, how do you convince them that Scotland too could be an independent nation and have a better standard of living than we do at present? It seems to be we have an almost total lack of confidence in ourselves.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to, sometimes I think we need to make clear what the difficulties are about realising what we've got. I am sometimes surprised that the SNP do not more clearly make the point that our renewable industry, which has an extraordinary capacity, is being completely hidebound by Westminster's control of energy. The kind of support that these industries can expect changes from year to year, all in the wrong direction, as England becomes more and more convinced that building nuclear power stations that no British company even wants to invest in is the best way to move forward. And yet I don't really hear enough actually targeting that difficulty. That is a huge problem. I don't think half of Scotland realises that energy is run by Westminster, not by us. So there's issues like the attainment gap. I'm also baffled about why Nicola Sturgeon wants to or thinks that Scotland can eliminate the attainment gap when so much of it is dependent on poverty. And until you've got control of far more levers, you cannot eliminate or even tackle poverty very well. Of course you can do better than you are at the moment, but I just think there needs to be a lot more of the people at the top making clear where a lot of problems actually spring from. That's my personal view. Yes?
Sorry. So can you hear me all right? Is that okay? Yeah. I live in Ellen, and I would say that there's a grassroots movement. You mentioned that we've got to proceed as though things are already happening, and they are actually, with the politicians and everybody. You know, it's as though people realise that they're not going to speak for us because they've not got our interests in mind, nor in heart, and that we ourselves have to do something about it. And I think it is actually happening. You know?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, traditionally...
So we have confidence in that, I think.
Yes, that's the way... This is a really important moment because I think Scots have got a lot of a kind of big attitude that politics happens somewhere else, in Edinburgh, with a higher class of person. Now, I know you'll all say, no, we don't. We're all Jock Thompsons, Bairns, and, you know, anybody who's above themselves, we cut them down. Yeah, well, maybe. You know, politics changes when people agitate. That happened with land reform. It happened with rent controls in Glasgow in the 1915. You can add to the list. It's always people who got there first, not politicians. So, yes, I think we could encourage them along. I think I may be developing a bad cough. There's one more question.
One more question. Right.
You do.
Just to say, I truly think that Scotland is moving forward. I truly think we will become independent. And I think there is a greater feeling of positiveness now than there was in 2014. I think people realise, as the Scottish people realise, we do have to move forward. And I have every belief that we will be independent in the next 3 years.
Grand. That seems a pretty good place to leave it, actually.
Right. A very, very positive end from Ruth. Can I just wrap us up now to say that I was actually moved by those two films. Didn't just enjoy them, I was moved. But perhaps as big a contribution to this evening of those two films was in fact the contribution from Lesley, which was tough.